Welcome, everyone, whoever's joining us on Facebook Live or watches this eventually on YouTube once it gets there. Welcome. We're in Job chapter 30 tonight, and we are at River Life Chapel in Youngstown, New York. We meet on Wednesdays at 6 o'clock, and we are... Here, we invite you, if you're in Western New York, to join us. And if you are not in Western New York, not sure who that is, but I see some hearts flying on Facebook. Hello. If you're not in Western New York, you can join us through Facebook Live, and these do usually eventually make it to YouTube unless there's some technical difficulties. And so we also would invite you, if you're in Western New York and you don't have a home church, join us here at River Life Chapel in Youngstown, 3474 Creek Road in Youngstown, New York, at 10:30 in the morning on Sundays. All right, we are in Job chapter 30, and we are working our way through Job. We've been averaging about a chapter a week. So let's see how far we can get in this today. We're in Job chapter 30. Verses 1 through 8. This section is it's basically Job speaks of his misery. And chapter 30, verses 1 through 8, Job is mocked by lesser men than himself, is what we're going to see in these verses. So does somebody want to read verses 1 through 8? Anybody? Or you want me to just...
Somebody will. No, I'm not. I can do it.
Okay.
But now they mock me, men younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained, to put with my sheepdogs. Of what use was the strength of their hands to me, since their vigor had gone from them? Haggard from want and hunger, they roamed the parched land, in desolate wastelands at night. In the brush they gathered salt herbs, and their food was the root of the broom bush. They were banished from human society, shouting at as if they were thieves. They were forced to live in the dry stream beds, among the rocks and in the holes in the ground. They brayed among the bushes and huddled in the undergrowth. A base of nameless broods, they were driven out of the land.
All right, so in this section, Job is describing he's describing people that were in his former life, they were nowhere near his caliber.
Noble people.
Yeah, they were not noble people. Job's pretty rude about the people who are now mocking him. So in verse 1, so now they that are younger than I hold me in derision. Their fathers I would have disdained to set with the dogs of my flock. So the people mocking Job, these young guys, now this is probably not speaking of his three friends. So in all likelihood, this scenario is pretty well known in the area where Job lived. And other people are aware of it. They're mocking him because Job's friends probably would not have been young men. They would have been his peers more likely than not. So this in particular is showing that what Job's going through is more far-reaching than the three guys sitting there with him. Others were maybe others were around listening to Job's friends' so-called wisdom. Maybe they came and went and mocked him. It's unlikely Job was going a whole lot of places because probably every breath was painful, so getting up and walking through town, if that was even an option. So these are probably other young men that were mocking and holding Job in derision. And he says, these young people, their fathers weren't even good enough to tend my dogs. You know, that's pretty much what he's saying there. So he's basically, my note, he would not have even hired them to oversee the dogs. That's, yeah. So these are the people mocking Job. Most, like I said, most likely it's not his three friends. And then dogs were regarded with disgust in the East as being unclean. And we'll look at 1 Samuel 17:43 to see where this idea of saying something about a dog was basically a slam, like it is today. I mean, you know, yeah, you're such a dog. You know, it's pretty much the same back then. And so 1 Samuel 17:43 is actually Goliath. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with staves?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. So just the presence of David was an insult to Goliath. You punk kid. I mean, I'm the warrior of the Philistines, and Israel's sending me this little punk kid? Am I a dog that you're coming after me with a stick? You know, David didn't even have a stick. He had some stones. But, you know, I don't know about the stick, but the stones sure hurt Goliath. You know, that sticks and stones saying. Goliath found out that, you know, yeah, they do hurt. But anyhow, so the notion of a dog is not, it's not a commentary that's positive. And we can kind of keep that in mind when you think about one of the two people that Jesus said in the Bible had great faith. And that was, one of the two was the Syrophoenician woman who came to him to have her child healed. And Jesus said, "It's not right for me to give the children's bread to the dogs." That's a slam. That's a slam. I mean, I've heard people teach, well, that Greek word was a cute little puppy, and, you know, kind of trying to mellow it out. But it wasn't mellow. Jesus basically slammed her, and he knew what was going to happen, and he was testing her faith. And what did she say? Boy, I love that. She didn't say, "Who are you calling me a dog? I'm lawyering up. I'm suing you." She didn't say that. She said, "That's true, Lord. But even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." So I love that story. So, and then that prompted Jesus to say, "I haven't seen this great of faith, not even anywhere in Israel." The other one was also not an Israelite. That was the Roman centurion. Anyhow, we won't go there. Thanks, Job. So Job is not, you know, calling someone a dog or saying they weren't even good enough to tend my dogs, you know, is not in any way a positive. So Job's basically talking about these young mockers. Verse 2, these mockers' fathers were unprofitable to Job, how much less these young scoffers. Basically is what my note says. Yes, whereunto might the strength of their hands profit me? They didn't profit me, in whom old age was perished. So basically, these young guys' fathers were not profitable to Job. And now these young guys are mocking him and holding him in derision. So Job's misery and the loss of respect here. And then verse 3, for want and famine they were solitary, fleeing into the wilderness, in former time desolate and waste. So one of the commentaries I looked at, Job thought of what worthless men were now his thought about what worthless men were now his loud critics, and how unjust it all was.
They had their own set of troubles, but now it's kind of like their troubles are forgotten. Now they got somebody else to pick on.
Yeah, and a lot of times that's something we can learn from. A lot of times people put others down that kind of, in their mind, elevates themselves, and so we got to be careful of that. I mean, main thing we always have to be is checking our attitude. What we say might very well be right. I can certainly slice and dice and slash all kinds of heretical doctrines. It's part of what I think God's called me to do. But I have to watch my attitude when I'm doing it, because there but by the grace of God go I. And so what you say, like a lot of what Job says, God said it was right, but Job's attitude over time got worse and worse and worse. Now, maybe, probably justifiably so, at least in human thinking, but, so it's constantly, we got to constantly watch our attitude. We might be right on the money with what we're saying, what we're thinking, what we're observing, but what's our attitude? And that we got to watch. What Job's saying about these young mockers, he might be saying, and he might be truthfully presenting the facts, but maybe by this point he's got an attitude problem.
And sometimes when it comes to our attitude, sometimes it's really obvious we've got an attitude problem.
Yeah.
But sometimes only God knows
Yeah.
what our attitude is. And sometimes we don't have an attitude problem.
It just looks that way.
Yeah, but God knows we don't.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and that happens. That happens a lot of times when you confidently stand on what the Bible says, what it actually says, and you're confident. If I'm quoting Scripture, I know I'm right. I absolutely know I'm right. Once I start interpreting it, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But a direct Bible quote, I'm right. That's all I know, And I'm going to confidently stand on the Word of God, and I don't care who says what. I mean, in society today, there's all these different sins that people are trying to justify and say, God's okay with this, Jesus is okay with that, and blah, blah, blah. No.
No, he's not.
No. Absolutely not. God is never okay with sin. Sin is so bad, so horrible in God's sight, only one thing can satisfy it, and that's the death of Jesus Christ. His death, burial, and resurrection, the blood of Jesus, is the only thing that God accepts in payment for sin. So never take sin lightly, never redefine it, which happens all the time these days. So in verse 3, there's some words. I looked up solitary, which literally is defined as hard as a rock or dried up. So that's, in community, they were pretty hard and dry. They had nothing to offer, really. And then fleeing is defined as gnawers of the wilderness. So they fleeing is gnaw. So they're gnawing in the, like grazing, gnawing, chewing in the wilderness. Which my notes basically what they gnaw, what it is they're gnawing follows in the next verse, in verse 4. So Job is contrasting his former days of blessing with what he's enduring of these mockers. And we saw that last week when Job reminisced about his former days of blessing. So in verse 4, we see what it is they're gnawing in the wilderness. Who cut up mallows by the bushes and juniper roots for their meat. So mallows is saltwort, which some translations will use. It grows in the desert and is eaten as a salad by the poor. So I had to look that one up. Never heard of saltwort. And the King James mallows, I'm thinking mallow cups and all these things I used to like back in the day that I can't eat anymore. I'm like, that can't be it, so. Salt herbs, saltwort, WORT is what some translations probably have that. But basically, it's
very much a vegetable.
Yeah,
you wouldn't like.
And it's grows in the desert, and it's salad for poor people. So. So that was the mallows and the juniper, which is some translations will use broom, kind of a tree that can be used for broom type of things, of which the bitter roots are eaten by the poor. So basically, these guys barely getting by, their fathers weren't worthy of tending the dogs. They're barely getting by eating junk that they dig up in the desert. That's what Job's basically speaking about there. Verse 5, we're still describing all these people. They were driven forth from among men. They cried after them as a thief. So, verse 5, these mockers were so worthless, more civilized people had nothing to do with them and drove them away like people would drive thieves away. So, not only did Job have something to say about him, but others didn't hold him in very high esteem either. They drove him away, like you would if someone was a thief, someone breaking into your house, you'd drive them away, if you could. So that's more or less what these guys were like, And they're mocking and holding Job in derision and elevating themselves over Job. I don't know. Probably these guys were sitting around listening to Job's friends and emboldening themselves with the wisdom of these other guys, so-called wisdom. God has something else to say about that. But
sounds like Job. Job now sounds like his friends when they talk to him. Yeah, Job definitely, in the course of time, he definitely has an attitude problem that grows. Not in human terms. You definitely can't blame him. He definitely did better than I would have. That's why his name's in the Bible a number of times and mine's not. That and the fact I wasn't around then, but I probably wouldn't have been in the Bible if I was around at the time it was being written. And then verse 6. To dwell in these guys, they drove them away to dwell in the cliffs of the valleys, in the caves of the earth, and in the rocks. So they were driven away, and then they were forced to dwell and live in undesirable places. Dwell in the valleys at that time was a mark of wretchedness, And I didn't really see why in the notes that was the case. Probably something that could have been looked into more, but anyhow, it was the cities were most often built on high ground, mountains, not mountainsides, not usually in valleys.
It's like where the lepers were.
Yeah,
I'm guessing that probably part of the reason is because like the valleys are less able to be defended
Yeah.
than like a hill or a high point.
Yeah, and
so it like the poor people would be out in the valley
Yeah.
with their farming and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the rich people would be in the defended cities.
yeah, for sure.
Although to me, the valley seems like a logical place to go if you're poor because usually in a valley there's more likely a river because that's a low point, so you have fresh water and all that.
Yeah.
Plus a source of water for like growing food and livestock and all that.
Yeah. So yeah.
Maybe more rich people could like afford to live farther away from like water and whatnot. It's like because they can afford to dig wells or whatnot.
Yeah.
And so if you lived in the valley, it meant that you didn't have much.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So all good observations there. Verse 7, verse 6, they went and dwelled in the valleys. Among the bushes or the nettles, they brayed. Under the nettles, they were gathered. So they brayed like wild donkeys wanting food, because it's in conjunction with that eating the desert junk. And so they brayed like donkeys wanting food. They're disorderly huddling together encampments in the bushes or nettles, thorns, or thorn bushes. So there's no organization. They're making noise like wild donkeys, which is probably appropriate because that's probably what they're doing to Job too by holding him in derision, sounding like wild donkeys. And there's no structure. They're just huddling in these thorn bushes and stuff. So, and then I think Ethan said about possibly for protection too, because they're not on the high ground. They're in the valley, and maybe, if you're in the thorn bushes, somehow little protection there from whatever. And then verse 8, they were children of fools. Yes, children of base men. They were viler than the earth. So Job's mockers are useless, vile children of fools, viler than, and I looked that up, rather they were driven or beaten out of the land. And then one of the notes was troglodyte or dwellers in caves. And people who lived in the caves were not highly esteemed.
What was that word?
Troglodyte. Cave dwellers.
Mine says in verse 8, worthless fellows, even those without a name, they were cast out from the land.
Yeah.
Although I wonder if that people would drive them away like thieves because they were thieves.
They could have been.
Those caves out in the Middle East are really complex. And
Yeah.
give great easy ways to maneuver. You can go in one cave, come out another cave entrance. So I wonder if there were thieves because a lot of people in those caves would use those cave systems to be able to get out different places along the road and quickly jump someone and then go back into the caves and run off to some other part of the cave.
I would say vile, worthless people pretty much describes the types who might be thieves. Vile and worthless.
People without a conscience.
Yeah. All right, the next section. So the first section was Job's misery, loss of respect. this next section, verses 9 through 15 of chapter 30, Job's misery, incessant mockery. So it's along the same vein, but this more looks at some of the different types of mockery that he was enduring. Verse 9, and now I am their song, yes, I am their byword. So basically, Job has become a song of derision to these inferior mockers. My thought, and I think I look at that. Do I look at that a little later? Yeah, I think maybe. But anyhow, my thought with that is, similar to Jesus, the mockery he took. And we've already touched on it different times, but as I was studying and looking around, there's some kind of in-depth studies about the foreshadowing of Christ in the book of Job. And there's been a few that we've looked at straight out. Job's cry for the umpire or the go-between, that's definitely prophetic of the Messiah. But a lot of what Job went through foreshadows in some ways the Lord.
So they're making kind of a joke about his calamities.
Yeah.
By having a song.
Yeah. Making
carrying on the way they are.
Yeah, making a song of mockery about Job.
Makes me think of a bunch of baboons.
A bunch of what?
Baboons.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Do I go there?
Don't.
Nah, probably not.
I don't think so.
Probably not. Remind me later.
Okay.
All right, so let's see. Where are we? Verse 10. They abhor me, they flee far from me, and they spare not to spit in my face. Well, they literally spit on Jesus. This one here, this may be literally spitting contemptuously on him, or it may simply be spitting in front of Job, which was also a sign of disdain in those days. So, it's still pretty rude today if you're, walking down the street and there's somebody, walking towards you and you and you spit in front of them.
What do you think that they did to Jesus?
Oh, I think they spit right on him. That's what, pretty much what it says. And I tend to lean towards they spit on Job too, but just when I was going.
How incapable he was to retaliate.
Yeah.
And
So,
also,
yeah.
it wasn't, we're showing that people didn't really have a conscience. It's because, they spit on Jesus when he hadn't done anything wrong, and they spit on Job when he hadn't done anything wrong.
Yeah. All right. So, verse 11, because he hath loosed my cord and afflicted me, they have also let loose the bridle before me. So basically, Job's saying, God's come against me. So now they're all emboldened. They're gonna come against me too.
Mine says, because he, and I'm pretty sure that's talking about God, has undone my bowstring and afflicted me. They have cast off the bridle before me. I wonder if that kind of means God's taken away my ability to kind of defend myself.
Yeah.
And so they've kind of unbridled themselves to do whatever they want, kind of.
Yeah.
I can't retaliate.
Yeah, definitely there. I think a little bit later in the chapter here, they come against him like water through a breach in the wall. So that's a little later. So yeah, Job can't defend himself. A bow that's unstrung is pretty much useless. A bow that's unstrung isn't even a good staff to, a stick to fight with, because it's not designed for that. So an unstrung bow is pretty useless. Job can't defend himself, and now it's like, well, probably kind of like the Israelites storming Jericho after the wall was, crumbled. There was no protection, and when the walls came down, boy, were they emboldened because they knew God was giving it to them. Well, this is what Job's feeling. God's brought the walls down. There's no protection. There's no power for him. So everyone's emboldened to assault and attack.
It's like the Lord to actually do that. Because he's always testing us to our extreme limits. But he never will give us something that we cannot. Like, he will not tempt us beyond what we're capable.
Yeah.
And we got to believe that.
Yeah.
We got to believe that.
Now so God never tempts us beyond what we're capable of, but here's the scary part to that.
Like
I have been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who lives, but Christ who lives in me. So what is it I can't handle? It's just the me part that's the problem there. So anyhow, yeah, I often think about that when that verse is brought up. It's like, well, I've been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who lives, but Christ who lives in me. So what is it I can't handle?
I can do all things.
through Christ.
Yeah. So
His grace is sufficient.
yeah, it's definitely it's not a promise of you not going through the ringer. It's definitely not a promise of that. So anyhow, thanks, Job. We're all over the Bible with Job, so that's cool. All right, verse 12. Let's see. Did I cover verse 11? My cord, an unstrung bow, youth, a low brood of rabble. To rise, I want to do this. Youth is a low brood of rabble. To rise on the right hand to accuse, as that was the position of the accuser in the court. So in the court, the accuser was on the right hand, and I don't know if that's facing the judge or if that's based on...
That'd be verse 12, so we are done.
Yeah, so we are, my notes are running into each other. So verse 12, upon my right hand rise the youth. Oh yeah, I did get ahead of myself. They push away my feet, and they raise up against me in the ways of their destruction. So... we talked about that. They're on the right. That's the side for the accuser in the court. And Zechariah 3:1. And he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to resist him. So there's the position of the accuser at his right hand. And again, I didn't look up to see if it was facing the judge or not, the judge's right hand. I didn't look that up, but anyhow, you can go study that on your own if that interests you enough. And then let's see. Then Psalm 109:6, set thou a wicked man over him, and let Satan stand at his right hand. All right. And then, of course, Revelation 12:10 identifies Satan as the accuser of the brethren. So Aldina has repeatedly said Satan's at work in this book of Job. Well, here Job points it out. And so that Job does acknowledge Satan. In past chapters, I couldn't recall that he did. But, actually, Job doesn't. Those are the other verses. He acknowledges the young guys are accusers. So actually Job doesn't. It's cross-referencing that gets to where Satan is mentioned in connection with these young brood of rabble who are accusing Job.
These lowlifes.
Lowlifes, yeah. That's a good contemporary word for it. And that's, again, that's completely factual of these guys. They're lowlifes. And when you look around in our world today, it's completely factual that people burning down cities and destroying property and robbing and beating and murdering and whatever else they do, it's not inappropriate to describe them as lowlifes. It's inappropriate to look down your nose at them in a position of arrogance. The only difference between me and them is I've recognized my sin and I've repented and I've accepted Jesus. But by the grace of God go I. And thus was the Apostle Paul, hunting down Christians, consenting to Stephen's stoning, delivering men, women, and children to prison.
Yeah.
Many of which would wind up dead. So that's to acknowledge and describe sin in the harshest of terms is not a problem. To be like a Pharisee and say, I thank you, Lord, that I'm not like this guy over here. That's what the problem is. Okay? So, and that's a big thing in the world today. Everyone wants to, well, that's not very Christ-like. Oh, really? Should I get a whip? Should I get a whip and overturn money changers' temples? Should I call you a child of Satan? That's what he called the Pharisees, the teachers of the law. You are of your father, the devil. Is that Christ-like? Just saying.
It was Christ who said it. So
Of course it's Christ-like. Christ never compromises truth. Never. Again, for us, it's the attitude. We got to watch the attitude. Being hard-hitting is not a problem. Being arrogant or having a wrong attitude about it is. And that's probably we're seeing a little of Job having a wrong attitude here in some of the things he says about. And once we get into we got one more chapter of Job and then chapter 32. So we got today and then chapter 31, then chapter 32. We start seeing Elihu and then he's on for a number of chapters and then God comes on the scene around 38. So we'll start to see Job exposed for the wrongs that he did. Again, remember, God said what he said was right. Probably some of how he said it was not. So I think that's what we're going to see when we go ahead. All right. Which verse are we on here? 13. They mar my path. They set forward my calamity. They have no helper. So this is an image of an assailed fortress, kind of continued. They tear up the path by which Job might get assistance. So basically, if you're attacking a fortress, it's like, you see, what was it, World War II or World War I movies, Bridge over the River Kwai or something like that. So they try and destroy the bridge. Well, here it's the same kind of imagery. Destroy the road so that no help is available. If the bridge is gone, the tanks can't come, or more troops or whatever. So that's the kind of image that's happening here, that these young guys, they're ripping apart the road, the path by which help might come. Even these contemptible youths don't need help assaulting Job. They have no helper, it says. And then verse 14, they came upon me, here's the one I mentioned earlier, they came upon me as a wide breaking of waters. In the desolation, they rolled themselves upon me. So again, it's that image of this fortress and like waters rushing through a wide breach. So like we talked about when Jericho fell. They and on the side, they were emboldened. Those that the walls didn't fall on, were terrified, because here's your strength just came crumbling down, and they probably weren't even in any way prepared to fight, because they were not expecting a fight, because this rabble of Israel had no way they were going to beat them in their city, their walled city. I mean, these guys had just traveled through the wilderness. They weren't building catapults or battering rams or anything like that. They were just picking up manna and eating.
But
and
also, it says that they were terrified of Israel
Yeah.
because they had heard what had happened in Egypt.
yeah. So the fear of the fear of the Lord went ahead of them. So the people and of course the spies reported that they were terrified of them, and Rahab said that. We all know your God's gonna. So
They had heard everything that God had done for the people of Israel during the time of
Yep.
the wilderness. Everybody knew it.
Yep.
And they were kind of back and forth with how they felt like they could handle it. But in Jericho, these mighty men of Jericho, they thought, we can do this.
Yeah.
They psych themselves up to believe nonsense.
Well, and
Because especially God did this and this and this and this. No end to all these things, and still they think we can.
Well, it's
go
the
against God.
same thing like the Egyptians going into the river. I'm like, if I'm chasing you and you go through the river on dry ground, it just separated. There is no way in the world I'm running in behind you. See ya. I'm not running in behind you, because whatever separated that water, even if I don't believe in your God, whatever it was that separated that water could just drop it on me. Oh, and by the way, some intellectuals say that where they crossed the Red Sea, it was only like knee-deep water, which of course would make that an even more powerful miracle, to have all those Egyptians killed in knee-deep water.
Including horses.
Including horses, yeah.
And it says that the chariots and the wheels and
We're
everything
getting
came off,
stuck.
but it was all buried in the depths.
Yeah,
of the sea.
yeah. It was.
They've been finding them.
Yeah. Archaeology always validates
So
the
are
Bible.
there any, knee-deep places in the Red Sea that we're aware of from today?
I don't know, probably. I don't know. I mean, a lot of rivers and, probably near the edges. I don't know where they get this stuff from. Another one, some
They
scientists.
don't know where they get this stuff from.
No, they just make it up because they want to discredit the Bible. That's what it is.
Because another thing is whether or not it's knee-deep water or
First of all, it'd be
really
dry
deep
ground.
water, the water splitting itself is totally
Yeah.
supernatural.
Well, they say that was a strong wind.
A strong wind.
A strong wind.
Strong wind, yes, it was.
A strong wind, even on a
Still.
like a hurricane's not going to make the ground dry like a nice pad.
Yeah. With walls of water on either
And also,
I've
side.
seen puddles in the backyard.
And also,
during
if it's
days of
that-
strong wind, they don't blow away.
And also, if it's that strong of wind, wouldn't the people all be blown into the water?
Yeah, exactly. So, way too much logic for scientists. They go to too much school.
Yep.
Yeah. There I go again. The same one just came to mind. I'll tell you. You know what the definition of evolution is, right? Bunch of scientists making monkeys out of themselves.
Ooh, I like that. I gotta remember that.
That was the one I didn't go to before, but it came the second time, so I had to do it.
That's the one baboon reminded me.
Yeah,
I like that.
So, yeah. Scientists I know don't like it, but hey, yeah, I didn't ask their opinion. All right, so verse 15, Job mourned the agony of his present state of being despised among men, when before he was respected and honored, his honor and prosperity had vanished. And then I think we won't go there because we're running short on time. All right, the next section, Job's misery of pain, verses 16 through 23. So 16, my note says, Job's pain is incessant and his complaints are poured out, but primarily it is his anguish of soul that was his main crisis. He longs to understand why and be reconciled with God. So basically, yeah, Job is in a lot of physical pain, but he's also in spiritual pain. It's this anguish of his, like, God, as far as I know, I did everything right, and I don't believe the accusations of these guys and these young people we just talked about. God, they're not doing it for me either. So I just don't get it. And that spiritual, non-physical anguish is probably as bad or worse than the physical, which to me is another bit of a foreshadowing of Jesus. I think the worst part, as far as I'm concerned, the worst part of the cross and his crucifixion was that moment in time, and I have no idea how long it was, when God had to sever fellowship with Jesus that had been perfect for all eternity past. And Jesus took the sins of the world, and God couldn't commune with him. And that's when Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? So, like Job, I think probably the not knowing, the thinking he's not in relationship with God anymore was probably worse than the physical pain, which was horrible. But that to me is a bit of a foreshadowing of Jesus. He left fellowship with God so that I could be in fellowship with him. Take that to the bank, folks. If you don't know Jesus, man, it's time. It's time. We don't know how much time we got left. We ain't promised tomorrow. Whether the world ends tomorrow or whether you end tomorrow, we don't have a promise of tomorrow. So get right now. Jesus died for your sins, rose again from the dead. Come to Christ. All right. Thanks, Job. That was a good one. All right. Verse 17. Again, Job complains of his gnawing pain and sleep deprivation. Sleep is not being helpful to Job. And think about it in these terms. Oftentimes when we get sick, well, number one, all we can do and all we want to do is sleep. The body just makes it happen because that's where a lot of the healing, takes place. But while you're asleep is also when you're not feeling the pain. So Job's not getting a whole lot of sleep. 17, my bones are pierced in me in the night season, and my sinews take no rest. So,
So something's going on with his bones.
Yeah, he's, what did I look up? Did I look that up? No, I didn't. But, so, yeah, and I think maybe the bones are mentioned again in a couple of verses.
Maybe because it gets cooler at night, he's having, any kind of cold affects the deep inside the bones.
Yeah, and he's not getting any rest. Very little. Sooner or later, going to pass out for some period of time. So, but he's not getting any good sleep. He's not getting sleep that gives him at least relief from the pain while he's unconscious. So it's just incessant.
And also, when you don't sleep for long periods of time, you might start seeing things that are like unpleasant and all that.
Yeah. And you get,
hallucinations. And
yep. And you get pretty cranky too. I'd say. What?
With the hangaries.
Yeah, the hangries, yeah. I think Job fits into that category. I think we've seen him a little cranky here this chapter.
cranky, yeah.
So, but yeah, so sleep isn't helping him. Verse 18, even Job's clothing is a source of pain. Due to the boils, his clothes are tightly bound to his body, increasing his discomfort.
I find this verse a little confusing. In his great power, God becomes like clothing to me. But that first part of the verse.
Yeah.
Like translation.
That's the NIV.
was the NIV.
So the King James, by the great force of my disease is my garment changed. It bindeth me about as the collar of my coat. So let's see if I looked anything up. Go ahead.
My version is the easy to read version.
Yeah.
And it says, God grabbed the collar of my coat and twisted my clothes out of shape.
Yeah. So I looked at some of that. I thought I had some of that. Oh, verse 19, some of that comes into. But the garments changed. It kind of ties in with previous verses, from a robe of honor to a robe of mourning. Like sorrowful. So there's different possibilities with that.
Like, I think I'm kind of getting the feeling. It's like, okay, he's saying that God is doing this. It's, when the clothing can become an advantage to somebody who's going to attack you.
Yeah.
It's kind of like grabbing the clothes and yanking.
Yeah. That's
and then it
the next
and then
verse.
The next verse.
Yeah.
Like he feels like God is dealing with him like
Yeah.
that.
So my note for verse 19, Job feels that God has grabbed him by the collar, thrown him into the mud, and he's become useless, dust and ashes. I liked, as I was looking, I liked the New Living Translation of verses 18 and 19, which says, with a strong hand, God grabs my shirt. He grips me by the collar of my coat. He has thrown me into the mud. I'm nothing more than dust and ashes. That said it pretty well. That's the New Living Translation on that one. Verse 20, Job desperately wants God's help, but God does not answer, and Job has no idea why. So 20, I cry unto thee, and thou dost not hear me. I stand up and after when Job came on the scene, the young men stepped back and got out of his way, and the older people rose out of respect. Well, that's what Job is saying here. I stood up. He's saying, stand up is the reverential attitude of a suppliant before a king. So that's, and the king, it's like the judge. He enters the room, all rise, only Job didn't have to be commanded to do it, but that's the idea is, someone worthy of respect, God, Job stands reverentially in his presence, is what's being said there. So Job stands in respect for God, his king. Job has a respect for God the way the others used to respect him, which is what we just talked about in Job 29:8. And then in verse 21, again, Job acknowledges God's ultimate authority and control. He says, but then thou art become cruel to me. With thy strong hand thou opposest thyself against me. So God is against him. And God's in absolute control. He uses the word in the King James, cruel. I looked that up. It's to act harshly and to oppose against. So that's certainly not against God's character to act harshly. And Job said it at the beginning, the Lord gave, the Lord took away, blessed be the name of the Lord. And God very precisely adds, and in all this, Job didn't charge God foolishly or sin with his lips.
Right.
So it's true. God can definitely be harsh when he needs to be. And in this case, there's some attitudes in Job that are being worked out, and God's desire is the end result of Job knowing God better than he did at the beginning. So even if you're the best of the best, you can be better. Oh, Lord, help us learn that one. Okay, so verse 22, Job feels beaten and helpless as a leaf whipped around by strong winds. And then King James used the phrase like dissolving substance, which basically one of the commentators said, my hope of deliverance is basically gone, is what he's saying. So, for I know that thou wilt bring me to death. That's 23. For I know that thou wilt bring me to death and to the house appointed for all the living. Did I miss one? Verse 22. Oh, verse 22 is the one whipped around like a leaf. And 23, Job feels like God wants to and will bring him to death, which is another hint at like an afterlife, because he says God is going to bring Job to death, the house appointed for all the living. So pretty much everyone alive is going to die, and there's some kind of house there. It's just a hint. I wouldn't build a doctrine of an afterlife on that one verse alone, but it is a hint.
Hey Bob,
Yeah.
is 23, the first sentence in 23, like dying to self? Is that in the same?
You could probably go in a spiritual application with that. God definitely wants us to die to self. That's why Jesus says, take up your cross daily. So you could take that, this idea that Job feels God wants him to die and expects he's going to kill him at some point. That's what Job's expectation is. So yeah, in a spiritual sense, definitely. We just talked about it. No longer I who lives, but Christ who lives in me. I have been crucified with Christ. So there is that dying, that death, and then picking up our cross daily is a daily dying to self. So yeah, I don't think it would be a very long stretch to be able to go from what Job is physically experiencing and expecting to the concept of death to self. Yeah, good catch. All right, the end of the chapter. Job's misery of injustice. Verses 24 through 31, Job bemoans the injustice against him. Verse 24, Job is crying out in his devastating situation, and God will not lift a finger to help him. Job cannot believe that God's silence is within his nature, but he doesn't understand it. So he knows, where are we here, 24. Howbeit he will not stretch out his hand to the grave, though they cry in his destruction. So Job is saying that crying out in this kind of devastating situation, and you're eventually going to die. It's the house of all the living. Everyone's going to cry out, and it's going to be the same result, basically.
So is he kind of saying crying out doesn't really help?
Yeah, it's not, the dying is not avoidable for anyone. It's appointed man once to die and then to face the judgment. So we're all going to die. And so Job goes on, and verse 25, maybe that'll help with the understanding of it. Did not I weep for him that was in trouble? Was not my soul grieved for the poor? So Job wept for the poor and those in trouble. Job wondered why God did not treat him with the same kindness he had often treated others with. So Job just doesn't get it. That he doesn't understand. As far as he knows, he did everything the right way. But yet he's the one that's going through this. And then 26, when I looked for good, evil came. And when I waited for light, there was darkness. So Job's expectations were not met. He sought good and got evil. He sought light and got darkness. Job expected similar responses from God like those he gave to others. And God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts, and so we should be expecting from God what God says and what's in agreement with God's character and his nature, not what we think should be. And we hear that all the time. Well, if God is a loving God, how could he allow all this garbage to happen? Well, stop shaking your fist in his face and telling him to leave you alone. Maybe he won't. Yeah. You got to be kidding me. You kick God out of school and wonder why there's school shootings? You're kicking God out of the country and wondering why our country's circling the toilet?
Yeah.
If you tell God to leave you alone and he does, don't blame him.
Yeah.
That's your fault. He's just being kind and giving you what you want. But he is the ultimate final judge. And he's not mocked. In the long term, God is not mocked. He might let sin slide for a little bit. But then there's going to come Judgment Day. So the answer to your question, why does a loving God allow garbage to happen? Because you told him to. You told him to. And yeah, it happens to good people too, because sin's all around the world. I'll guarantee you, when I'm gone from this earth, I'm not going to have any evil to deal with. Because I'm going to be in the presence of God where no evil exists. I'm not going to be there. And if you go where evil exists, it's all on you, because if you're watching this, you're alive and you got a choice to make. The choice is God's way or yours. And if you choose your way, take your penalty. Take it like a man or a woman or whatever you think you are. Anyhow. Thanks, Job. All right, where are we? 27.
So what you're saying is that Hell's theme song is Frank Sinatra's "I Did."
Yeah. Kind of. That's pretty much it. You do it your way, you're going to get your reward. I prefer to let Jesus do it his way, and I'll take his reward. So, all right, 27. My bowels boiled and rested not. The days of affliction prevented me. So, bowels were regarded as the seat of deep feeling. Boiled, violently heated and agitated. And prevented was an Old English word for unexpectedly came upon me or surprised me. So he's the deep places, the deep seat of his feelings were violently angry and agitated. I want to know why God's mad at me. Yeah, so Job's revealing a little bit of internal problem going on there. It's the right motive. God, why are you angry with me? I want to know, why are you angry with me? Job's getting angry, not understanding why God's angry, So, anyhow, and it surprised him, is what that's saying. And then 28, I went mourning without the sun. I stood up and cried in the congregation. Mourning or darkened, some translations say, blackened though not by the sun. That is, whereas many are blackened by, so sun tanning, that kind of thing is what's being talked about there. I am by the heat of God's wrath. And then stood up in that verse as an innocent man crying for justice in an assembled court. So basically he's suffering because of God's wrath, and he's crying out for justice, in as it were in a court. He wants an audience with God. Alrighty, guess I'll read the King James. That ought to bring up some questions. I am a brother to dragons and a companion to owls.
My translation says, I have become a brother of jackals and a companion of owls.
Okay, so I looked at it.
Mine says, I've become a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches.
Mine says,
Yeah, so I looked it up basically, and jackals and ostriches is generally the definition, both of which utter dismal screams was what the connection there is basically my speech sounds like my brothers, the jackals and the ostriches. He's complaining, he's whining, complaining, crying out in pain and anguish is more or less what I got out of that. And it kind of, Micah 1:8 kind of shows similar. Therefore I will wail and howl. I will go stripped and naked. I will make a wailing like the dragons and a mourning as the owls. So that basically it's kind of referencing the noise of his complaint. Of course, the young people probably like the dragon idea. Just saying. Verse 30, almost done. Again, my skin is black upon me and my bones are burned with heat. Probably another poetic commentary about his suffering. His skin is rotting.
Probably
Turning black, from the disease, rotting. Like
Like forms of gangrene.
Yeah, it could be gangrene.
And my verse
Could be.
Is that what you're
My
saying?
Who
verse
says?
like my body's hot with fever as well.
Yeah, hot with fever. That was what I was going to say with the next part.
this one was my skin grows black and falls.
Yeah.
That's gangrene.
Yeah.
It's like gangrene.
Like gangrene, yep, falls from him. And so we've talked about the skin rotting,
Yeah.
being infested with maggots or worms. That was earlier chapters. And maybe a gangrene situation. He's in rough shape. And so his responses are certainly understandable to us, And then the high fever is the bones burning internally. That was that 30? And then 31. My harp also turned to mourning, and my organ to the voice of them that weep. So basically, in that, these instruments are properly appropriated to joy, which makes their use now even more sad by contrast, because these are two instruments normally are associated with joy, happiness, but Job uses them in poetic form here. The harp is turned to mourning, and the organ turned to the voice of them that weep. So, it would be like, I don't know what a good comparison would be like, maybe playing a mariachi band at a funeral or something like that, or an electric guitar or something at a funeral. It's not the right instrument for the situation. That's what's being kind of said here. So, all right, we got to the end of chapter 30. Lord willing, see you next week. Thanks for tuning in. God bless and goodbye.